How do we recognize the shadow? Just to remind us what we already know. Aspects of the self we split off and push out of awareness. Things we deceive ourselves about or try to lie to ourselves about. Habitual patterns in the body-mind that we ourselves cannot yet see. Habitual patterns of thought, sensation, and behavior that can hijack the proximate self and drive, basically. So functions of the self, I want to presence this in a particular way. And these are things, I want to talk about them right now in terms of the things that we call upon even to do this shadow work together. These are the parts of the self that we really galvanize and recruit to help us do our practice. One is the proximate self function is, of course, both identification and disidentification. And shows up as the capacity for integrating, translating, and transforming is another way of saying integrating, right? Because we're doing both. So tonight, think about how the proximate self has this, you have this tool that you're using all the time to identify and disidentify so that you can actually leverage that capacity that you always have to suspend identification and to choose to identify. That's a great function that we all have. Then the function of the shadow tends to show up through defense, dissociation, denial, repression as this forgetting, this kind of forgetting myself. So forgetting is, I'm going to suggest, a part of what the shadow performs. I forget some part of myself. The function of the distal self, I'm going to suggest, shows up as remembering. It might show up as where I draw from hope or faith or even fear or despair. Something I've touched before. It's in my realm of owned experience. And therefore I have a feeling of aversion perhaps because of that former experience, or maybe attraction because of that former experience. But I'm going to suggest it shows up as a kind of remembering of the self. And then this is the one I really want to point to, is the function of the antecedent self. The antecedent self, this is the seat of big mind, big heart, indivisible, right? When we do the shadow work, its beauty and its challenge is it pretty much does destroy the self in a moment. It pretty much levels the self. It cuts through our self-cherishing. It cuts through our ideas about ourselves instantaneously in a way that is not comfortable by definition. It stretches us by definition. And so the place I think that we need to go together to presence and that we can call on in ourselves and with one another is particularly big heart. And to recognize that all of this is play inside of big heart, big mind. So if at any point in our process tonight you feel like that, and hopefully we all will if we're doing meaningful shadow work, that sense of you hit that edge of like, this isn't feeling quite so comfortable. Where can we rest then? Well, then the opportunity, I think, is to rest in big heart, to actually rest there, quite literally. And maybe that's drawing on your partner resting in big heart, or you just look at all these amazing people holding the borders of this room, or whatever it is, wherever we go to draw on big heart. And that gets to be part of our practice as well. So just to begin to describe just the outlines of this work we'll do tonight. Again, different than 3-2-1, just to remember 3-2-1 is face it, talk to it, be it. Face it, describe something in the third person. Talk to it, dialogue in the second person. Be it, reside in the first person, right? And a beautiful way that ultimately we arrive at the be it. The thing that we have disowned. So whatever the disowned emotion or subpersonality experience, at the end of the process, we rest in that place, make contact and subjectively re-identify with it, hopefully to, over time, allow that to be an object in our awareness more often, right? But we rest in that subjectivity. What's a little bit different about this process, and by the way, I should just say, I guess it was maybe about 2.5 years ago now on a call for doing our ILP seminars that Ken had wanted us to really devise a process for a second level of all of these practices. And it's what I do, work with this process with myself and with clients. And in the teaching space, you're the second large group that I've extended this to. So here we are creating together. That basically these steps are face it, own it, transform it. And the difference being in the owning it, the difference here is going to be about a move that is about releasing the story, about the apparent causes or conditions that gave rise to this it. And again, you can let this wash over you like a story right now. I'm just giving you a few framings to plant for the moment. The learning will really be in the experience tonight, and we'll come back to this, but I just want to seed the way with a little bit of framing. It's really important to be able to have a coherent narrative, but how it changes so much, how we restory ourselves to ourselves. Yeah. This is really building on that. And so there's some implications here about where we are in our own our own emotional intelligence. There's some assumptions about where we are on that line to engage this process fruitfully. So I want to put that also out on the table. We can talk about that if we want. But it's suggesting that we can suspend that story and that we can specifically transform it by drawing on the wisdom that's inherent in every first tier emotion. Now, what do I mean by first or second tier emotions? Nothing other than the way that we relate to them. Nothing other than how we regard them. So, this is a really important point. The transforming it, we're gonna work with one particular emotion that we've already touched in with as a group today and look at its kind of correspondent wisdom that was talked about earlier. And when we do that, again, I want to suggest it's just how we hold it that bless you, that draws this distinction. And we're going to do that particularly by drawing on the emergent unconscious. You could say the bright shadow. The emergent self is what we're going to draw on and anchor our awareness into through the antecedent self. A few second-tier principles of shadow praxis that I want to offer up. This idea of projection. We so much go into the idea of it's your issue, it's my issue, right? Either I'm projecting onto you or you're projecting onto me. These are helpful in terms of trying to discern where the leverage points are of interactions, with people for sure. We do it reflexively all the time. From a certain vantage point, I want to suggest that what we could step into tonight together just to have the experience, just for fun, to see what we get out of it, is what if we are most interested in completely 100% owning the difficulty, regardless of where the projection might be coming from. And what if we told a different story that the projection just simply is? That somewhere it's appearing. And so for that reason alone, I'm going to engage it as mine to work with. And I want to suggest that this is actually really a kind of bodhisattva principle, really, from a unitive vantage point. If there's actually a recitation in some bodhisattva practices that says basically, the idea of be grateful, for all harm that may be done to me. I want to be grateful to any harm that comes my way. And you could think of that as harm against myself or harm that comes, seems to come from outside of me. And what would that possibly mean? Isn't that some kind of strange, masochistic, dependent confusion? Maybe, from a certain vantage point, possibly. But what if we took it from the place of the part of me, there's a mind training slogan also coming from particularly Tibetan Buddhist tradition that basically says, drive all blames into one. And I think that this idea of like, what if I'm interested in driving all blames into one, which is the experience of confusion about who I really am, which is not separate from anything at all. So I want to suggest that from the emergent self, for all, we're all in this room because we have a certain aspiration to really be of service, to really extend our compassion skillfully into the world. We all share that aspiration. And the fact that that's in our awareness at all means that we already are that. And we've got some work to do to become that together. So, from that vantage point, what if we just take this idea of it's your issue, it's my issue, it's an issue, it's an experience of difficulty or of blame or of hurt, and what if I just simply work with it as mine? Maybe it's for my benefit, maybe it's for your benefit, maybe it's for the benefit of somebody I don't even know, and what if I didn't even care about that? And I just said, I'm just going to do that because it's here to work with. So this is the mindset, the frame that I want to invite us into tonight. Then the embrace the sliding nature of the shadow. I want to suggest this is another second-tier principle of shadow praxis. The idea, again, that there's this negative charge of the preceding stage, the threat of the neighboring self stage. So we know that as the self moves along in development, that also that which is the neighboring, threatening stage we just left is also moving. It's also dynamic. So we know that the shadow moves with us, right? That the greatest confusion or darkness is right behind my head, right? It's a thing I can't ever quite turn around and see, but you guys can see it all the time. You know what I mean? But I can't quite, get there, right? No matter how I move. So that's one part of the shadow that we embrace. We just kind of say, that's the way it is. And the other part is the embracing the composite nature of the shadow. And I want us to begin to hold this together tonight, is that from a kind of integral vantage point, we could say the dark shadow is that, me kind of not able to see that darkest place, the place I just left or the place that I haven't made contact with. But that there's also this composite nature, because again, think of what we did with Dai this morning, with Suzanne earlier yesterday, and how together there's all these little fragments of self that are really tend to strangely be in shadow. And it's somehow through the power of something that we can bring more awareness to it sometimes than others, right? So just some ideas, just part of my bedtime story here, is that second tier shadow praxis, I want to suggest, would hold these three principles together, somehow hold them together.